Hi, welcome to the Jazz Piano School podcast. My name is Brendan Lowe, creator and founder of Jazz Piano School. In this particular podcast episode, I'm going to be teaching you about different bebop variations you can use over the different chord tones to all minor 7th chords, meaning the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Now, with these variations, you can elevate your improvisation sound in a bebop style. And again, it's going to give you ideas about how you can use these bebop approaches to start your lines, to move around the chord tones, to create tension, and really start to add some new flavor and spice into your improvisation. This is going to be a series, so in the next podcast episode, I'm going to review dominant 7th chords and how to use bebop approaches over each chord tone to dominant 7th chords. And finally, in the last installment of this, I'll be going over major 7th chords. With that being said, let's dive right into this episode. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to start with the root, obviously. And so the root for a minor 7th is going to be, for example, a C minor 7, this. Now, the first step to thinking about bebop approaches around the root are going to be this chord scale above and this half step below. All right? So the easiest thing we can do here that I love to do over the root or use for the root is just a combination of both of those. So I'm going to do chord scale above, half step below to the root. Now, if you don't know what bebop approaches are, you're going to want to research that, but essentially they're creating tension around an anchor note to our chord. Now, the 4 anchor notes, or we call them chord tones, are C, E flat, G, and B flat, right? So when we create this kind of tension that resolves to our chord tone, it's kind of like we have tension, and release. And again, the chord tones are obviously reflecting the harmonies because we're playing the 4 notes or surrounding the 4 notes of the chord and then landing on them. For example, so you hear how we have kind of some movement and then release, some tension and then finally release. Now this is what bebop is all about. It's about this tension and then release. And I can go the other way as well. Right? And this is how bebop lines are created. They kind of weave in and out around the chord tones, but they land on the chord tones, they resolve to the chord tones, and then they create more tension, right? So this is a very easy way to start a line off. You can use these in the beginning of the line, in the middle of the line, or at the end. I'm really just going to be talking about the beginning because as we start to get into some other movements, they're going to be pretty advanced. I really don't want you to get ahead of yourself, all right? So a half step below, chord scale above. So we can do things like this, right? So I started my line off by using half step below, chord scale above. I could do the opposite as well. Right? I can just use half step below if I want. If I want to make it a little bit more simple, I could do that. Right? I could do into a triplet. See how I'm starting my line off like that. Right? I could do and then into a triplet. Sorry. So here I'm going, right? So these are different ways you can use the chord scale above to half step below, and you can come down as well. That's a really nice thing to do. And then we're kind of into our F dominant bebop scale from there. Now the F dominant bebop scale, I don't want to get into that, but essentially that's just going to be your F mixolydian with a passing tone in between the 7 and the 1. So we can use that to move up and down with a bebop sound after we've started with our approach. So now we're on the 5 of the F dominant bebop scale. I'm going to come down, okay, just like this. I can also go up. So as you notice here, there's contrary motion kind of that can happen in either way, meaning I can start my line with a bebop approach that goes up and resolves down and comes down, or I can start my bebop approach on top, going down to the half step below, and then coming down, right? And I can do the same going up. Or I can go, right? So a lot of options, even with the just a small amount of bebop knowledge here that's happening, you can really start to get some cool things happening. Right? So that's going to be more or less half step below to chord scale above and just combinations of that. Okay, let's get into some other movements we can do around the root here. So we can go, this is going to be a really advanced one, right? So we can go essentially starting from the 7, half step below, chord scale above, half step above. This is essentially like a double chromatic approach. So we have a chromatic here, down into the root. Sorry. Right? And I ended with another approach. If I do it up here, I can come down. Right? If we flip it or invert it, it would sound like this. Now, complete transparency, I actually don't use that one that much. I'm not too keen on it. I like the sound of the other one better because it kind of just falls down into the root there. Just sounds a little out. It's not really widely or commonly used in bebop, but you certainly can use this if you want. Right? And then start going up. All right? So again, you could just start to pluck out the chromaticism within what I just showed you as well. So we could just do... So I'd be starting my line off with this. Right? Or I can start my line off like this. Right? So I can either start my line with just a chromatic right into the root here, or coming back down. Okay? Now another rhythmic twist on this particular approach that I'm showing you right now is this. So we're actually adding in one extra note, which is the chromatic below moving into the C. Oscar used this approach a lot rhythmically. It's a really fun rhythmic thing to get kind of a pop in your approaches. Right? So, 7th, half step below, chord scale above, half step above, half step below, root. Right? So on and so forth. You can use that going up, going down. You can use it to end. Right? However you want, right? But that's a more advanced approach to use. Let's move on to the third now. Those are going to be the majority of approaches and things you can do surrounding the root. Right, surrounding the root, and obviously we're not looking to like get outside the confines of the root plus like just a whole step. That's what really a bebop approach is. It's really dealing with a half step or a whole step interval that surrounds the chord tone that you're looking to approach or use. So if we move to the third, if we look at the area of a whole step or a half step, it's going to be simply involving this area right here. Right? And again, our lines and the way we approach bebop, we really want to target the chord tones. I say this all the time. And so this is exactly what bebop approach helps us do. It helps us target the chord tone by adding some tension and release. And this is actually what causes the sound. It actually makes up the sound of bebop. So now for the third, I can start with the basics. I can start with my half step below. Right? Don't pay attention to the finish of the line. I just really want you to listen to the sound, how each of these chord tones, bebop approaches affects the beginning, really. Right? This is a line that people use a lot, going into the triplet. Maybe something like that, right? Or this. You can add the whole chord scale above, half step below. Right? You can go up, right? right? And again, I'm using this passing tone here as my bebop scale. The reason for this is because once I hit my chord tone, the chord tones are going to land on the downbeats, which makes the bebop scale sound better. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, right? And now all the chord tones are lining up on the downbeats. Now I'm saying chord tones, this is actually a more advanced bebop theoretical practice. These are, when I say chord tones, I'm not talking about the C minor 7 chord tones. I'm talking about F dominant 7 chord tones. And back in the day, Charlie Parker, a lot of these bebop guys, they weren't really thinking Bud Powell. They weren't really thinking over the minor 7. Bebop was really much simpler back then. They were really just thinking dominant to major, and then slowly the minor 7 kind of got introduced and new things started evolving from there. But even over 2-5-1s, they were still kind of thinking dominant for the minor 7 chord and the dominant chord, and then resolving into the 1. This made it easier theoretically, mentally, to just think 5-1, 5-1. So they're really just thinking F7 bebop the whole time until they resolve into the 1 major. All right, that way you're not having to think about that extra chord, the minor 7, and it produces a slightly different sound because they're targeting F7 chord tones, right, instead of C minor 7 chord tones. That's a whole another ballgame. So when I say, as you can see, when I'm using my F7 bebop scale, it sounds a little bit different than me targeting all C minor chord tones. Kind of like a precursor into the F7. It kind of leads into the F7. That's just another improv strategy. Anyway, back to this. You can go down, you can go up, right? So you can start either way around the third. Some of the movements I like to use that are more advanced around the third are going to be using utilization of the half step above the third. So, right? So this is going to be on the and. So and 1 and 2, right? So the F is on the downbeat. Right? Or and 4 and 1 and 2. You can kind of start your line a little bit earlier. You can back it up. Right? And you can move up if you want. So this is a really nice line to use using the half step above. And I actually love using this with another not chord scale, excuse me, this full double chromatic approach from below, which would sound like this. So we're doing essentially a whole step below the third. So this is essentially a double chromatic now, because this isn't in the chord scale for a regular Dorian scale, right? But this adds a little bit more depth to this approach instead of just going. So this is now on the downbeat, 3 and 4 and 1. So we have one line that starts on the upbeat, and 4 and 1. And now this starts on the downbeat, 3 and 4 and 1. So it adds another extra note into this. Right? Sorry. Right? You can change up the rhythms after you get out of that. But that's a really cool thing to do. This is going to be the last one, or second to last. Half step below, chord scale above. Half step above, half step below. Right? Now, what I encourage you to do, I know I'm teaching you a lot of different language, bebop approach language, is spend time with each one. Just really spend time with each one. Take it through all the keys. You should know these approaches for every single minor 7th chord, right? Not just a C minor 7. Right? You should be able to do this in all keys. Right? It doesn't matter. So all these, you should spend time with each and every approach, practice it, and work your lines through every single minor 7th for all the different chord tones and variations I'm showing you, right? So that's a fun one. The last one is kind of like the last one I showed you on the root. Again, it's the same kind of rhythmic feel. It adds some more rhythmic spice, some more rhythmic flavor. Right? Double chromatic, chord scale above, half step below to the third. Okay? Let's move on to the fifth. Now, the fifth isn't a chord tone I particularly target that much, actually. I usually go with the third, the root, or the seventh. But the fifth is actually a very, very beautiful chord tone to target. I actually should, as I'm saying this, use it more because you can really get this natural 13 in as a target. Excuse me, as a tension. And then you're moving to half step below. Right? You can go up. You can go down. Right? Whatever it is, this is a beautiful note. This natural 13 is a beautiful note to use. Now, around the fifth, we have two other cool options that I do frequently use, and that's going to be a double chromatic on either side or both. So I do this a lot. Right? So it's a double chromatic, essentially just falling down into the fifth, starting on the 13, half step above, falling down into the fifth. I also go the other way. Right? So you can lead into the fifth by going up or coming down. I also said you can combine it both ways, right? Or you can go the other way. I don't usually use that one as much. Again, that's kind of like the first around the root I showed you. I don't really use this. I use this one more, right? Making sure that's not going off the camera there. But I love those two. I love those combinations. And again, you can kind of use the same rhythmic Oscar feel here, which I do use frequently around the fifth as well. Right? Okay. So that's a lot of variation for the fifth. Again, you're going to approach those in the same different way. Finally, we come to the last chord tone in our chord for bebop approaches, different bebop approaches. That's going to be the seventh. Now, the seventh is a cool one. It's kind of a neutral color. I like to use the half step below to approach this a lot. You'll hear that line a lot. That's a very common use of bebop language in your soloing. Moving up, right? So if you think about this note here, it's kind of like it's the third of the F7 bebop scale. So if you start here, all you need to do is run up the bebop scale and you'll be utilizing the half step below. You can also use the chord scale above, which is going to be just the root. Right? Whatever you do with it. Right? Again, both of those are nice. Another nice thing to do here is the chromatic down into the seventh. Right? So this is a really nice one. I use this a lot. And I usually goes to this 5 because it's a cool sound to hear. And you can approach the third here. Right? And then you just run up the bebop scale. And then you might resolve, right? But a cool thing there, you can also combine it with a half step below. Right? So this, again, this would be the and here. So and 4 and 1. And then, of course, we can add the full kind of like Oscar-style approach to the 7th, right? So, essentially, double chromatic below, half step below, chord scale above, half step above, into the 7th. Now, again, these bebop approaches are meant to give you ideas and movements, right, that create tension and release to really spice up your playing and catapult different types of bebop sounds. Now, obviously, you can see that I'm combining them with other approaches throughout the line. So it is enough to just start your line off with an approach, right? But bebop is about combining these approaches, which actually creates the bebop sound in a lot of different ways. And again, you can think about it as like weaving through in and around the chord tones. So we have a little tension and then release, which falls onto the chord tone. Tension, release. So the bebop language is all about the tension, release, tension, and release. And you're using these different combination, these Lego building blocks, which are the approaches to weave in and out and around the chord tones, finally landing on the chord tone and then moving to another tension in which you weave around that other chord tone and then we resolve and then weave around another chord tone and resolve. And again, these aren't all the approaches. There are a lot of approaches, 4 different ways to start your minor 7 around your minor 7th chord. And again, to isolate these and to practice these, I'd highly recommend you take each one. Practice them, each one, through the keys, through all your minor 7th chords around the root. So if you're just starting this out, right, and you want to try this double chromatic on the root, you just want to learn the approach itself through all the chords first, right? So you can utilize it over every single chord. It's not going to really help you to advance your improv if you're just trying to use it and starting to play lines with it after, because you really don't learn the actual component. You don't learn the tool, because essentially you're just utilizing the tool over one chord and then starting to improvise. You really want to be disciplined to practice the tool in all keys so it can take the shape of freedom, right? That way you have more freedom over the tool to use it and improvise in different ways, different styles, different chords, obviously, and obviously in tunes too. You won't need to think about utilizing that tool in tunes because you'll have practiced it over all chords, meaning you have complete freedom over the tool. All right? So go ahead and start to isolate the ones you like. Work on the ones you like. If you want to go from the beginning, work on all of them. Be my guest. Start to improvise how you know best with the tools, all the approaches I showed you. Start to utilize different experimental lines with them in a slow, controlled fashion. Then finally maybe put a metronome on. Start to play over some 2-5-1s, some 2-5s, right? And then finally go to a tune and see if you can start to integrate some of these bebop approaches over all the minor 7th chords in a tune. And if you work on this, I guarantee your improv is going to get a lot better. I'm going to move to dominant 7th chords in my next podcast episode. Be on the lookout for that. Obviously, go to jazzpianoschool.com for more amazing free education and everything we have to offer. And we also have a membership available if you're interested in taking the next step with us. Hope you have a fantastic day. And as always, happy practicing. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Don't forget to go to jazzpianoschool.com to check out all of our free, amazing education, all of the free podcast blogs. We do have a membership if you're looking to take a next step forward with us, get access to over 1,000 different jazz piano videos, playbooks, mini courses, a main course curriculum, success path, and so much more. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at support@jazzpianoschool.com. I hope you have a wonderful day, and as always, happy practicing.